Hey darling, Boyce here. Welcome back to my channel. Here it is my goal to help you find your next book obsession. I am comfy, I am cozy, and I am ready to dive into today's video. Today we're talking about Bloodline, book 1 of the Root of All Evil series by ThinkTwice, published by Aethon books. And I want to start by telling you what this video actually is because it is not for everyone. If you've already read Bloodline and loved it, great. Drop me a comment, tell me why, we'll talk. But this video is for the person standing at the edge of their TBR pile, looking at this book, trying to figure out if it's worth the time investment. Because here's the thing, Bloodline has a genuinely strong rating, over 4.7 on Amazon, and it has a very vocal fan base. But it also has a number of readers who bounced off of it hard in the first few chapters, and they couldn't tell you why. And when I dug into that more, I found the answer pretty quickly. It's not a genre problem, it's not a world building problem, it's not even a magic system problem. Besides, the magic system is genuinely one of the more interesting ones I've come across in LitRPG in a while, but we're going to get into that. No, the divide is almost entirely about one thing, the main character. Whether you finish this book or whether you throw it across the room comes down to your tolerance for a protagonist who is, by the author's own admission, intentionally written as a bit of a jerk. And I want to be clear, that's not a criticism, that's a craft choice, and there's a real argument that it's an interesting one. But it is something you need to know before you start. I'm going to break down all of that for you today so you know exactly what you're walking into. By the end of this video, you'll know whether Bloodline is going to be your next obsession or your next DNF. Now, quick note before we get into it, and this one is specifically for anyone who is new to my channel. A first look is not a traditional book review. I haven't read this book cover to cover yet. What I have done is research it thoroughly. That means going through the Amazon reviews across every star rating, digging into Goodreads reader feedback, looking at what the community is actually saying in places where people don't sugarcoat it. I'm looking for patterns. I'm looking for what the marketing isn't telling you. I'm looking for the things that make readers love a book or put it down. And I'm bringing all of that to you in one place so you don't have to go digging yourself. There are no spoilers in a first look. The whole point is to help you decide before you read it whether or not this is for you. Now, I built this format specifically because I have spent about 15-16 years as a published author, and I know firsthand how much goes into a book and how often the readers who would love it never find it because the marketing didn't really speak to them. This is my attempt to fix that one book at a time. Okay, now let's get into it. First, let's talk about the basics. We're going to get into the logistics and get that out of the way first. Bloodline came out June 4th, 2024. It's book 1 in a series called The Root of All Evil by ThinkTwice, and as of right now, there are 2 books out. Book 2 is called Inheritance, and it dropped in January of 2025. I assume there are more books to come, but I forgot to ask ThinkTwice when I filmed the interview with him that's going to come out next week. So I can't confirm if that's happening or not, but I do assume that more books will be coming. So go in knowing that you have 2 available and not necessarily a complete series. Now, the good news on that front is that the first book does not end on a cliffhanger in the traditional sense. There's a story arc that closes. There's also clearly a larger story that's continuing. So you won't feel robbed if you read it, before book 3 exists. But you will want book 2 the moment you finish. Today's video is sponsored by me. Specifically my merch. You can get it at boyceinc.com, and specifically this one. This is my I am magicking as hard as I can hoodie, and if anyone asks why your TBR pile is so long, if anyone is wondering why you're still in your pajamas at 3 p.m., if anyone asks literally anything about your productivity or your life choices, in all seriousness, it is adorable. I absolutely love it. You may know this about me, but I love the cheapy designs. And I simply cannot think of a more accurate description of my life. It is 100% cotton. It is on the thinner side. Specifically, it's still really high quality, but it's meant as more of a lightweight hoodie than like this one, which is a really thick hoodie. There are loads of super cute colors to choose from. Size up for maximum cozy. The link is in the description. Wear it. Manifest the life of your dreams. You deserve joy in your life. Okay, let's get back to the video. So now let's talk about the ratings. We're sitting at around 4.7 on Amazon and Audible, and about a 4.3 on Goodreads. Those are strong numbers. Okay, so what is this book actually about? Let's talk about the premise. Bloodline is an Isekai reincarnation LitRPG, which I know that's a very trope heavy sentence, but let me just tell you what the book is and you can decide how you feel about the tropes in a second. Our main character is a man named Dollar, and I want to be specific about where he starts because it matters for understanding who he becomes. Dollar's first life on Earth was not easy. He came up from genuine hardship, poor, beaten down, abused, and out of that, he built something extraordinary. He became completely self-made, constructing wealth and influence from a starting point that had nothing going for it. A business genius with iron discipline and very little emotional warmth by the time he reaches the top. From what I can tell in my research, he really treated people as pieces on a board. He had no real relationships, no real vulnerability, nothing that looked like a soft spot. And that framework on Earth worked for him. He was successful. He was powerful. He had exactly the life he had constructed for himself, and he was, by any external measure, winning. And then his own sister had him killed. He dies. He reincarnates. And here's where it gets really interesting. He comes back as a literal baby in the world of Iowa. I think I said that right. It's a fantasy world with a magic system based on LitRPG, so there's a system with a capital S, monster threats, dungeon-style dangers, and a deeply complicated political and social power structure. Runes and formations are the cornerstone of power for those who know how to use them. Now, in a typical Isekai, the main character gets dropped in, there's some adjustment period, and then things just pick up and start going their way. That is not this book. The twist that makes Bloodline different from your standard Isekai reincarnation setup is that Dollar retains every single memory and every mental framework from his first life. He is a grown adult, fully formed, with a lifetime of ruthless experience, now trapped in a newborn's body. Which is, I mean, that's a pretty compelling premise of its own. But it gets harder before it gets easier, because this magical world is not a forgiving one, and Dollar's new family situation is immediately hostile. By the time he can walk and talk, his uncle is already sending assassins. An assassin shows up on Dollar's second birthday. He is living in poverty in a forest full of monsters with very little protection and no social standing. He quickly figures out that his only real path forward is to master the rune of formation and crafting system, to build his power methodically from the ground up in a world that would really rather see him dead. So the first half of the book covers Dollar from infancy to roughly age 7, which sounds like a slow burn, and you know it is, but there's a reason for that structure that I'll get into when we talk about the criticisms. The second half opens up considerably when Dollar finally ventures out into the wider world and meets a pair of adventurers who change the entire energy of the story. Now, this is not a book about someone who gets dropped into a fantasy world and breezes right through it. It's about someone who gets dropped into the worst possible circumstances and has to build everything, including himself, from nothing. And that's either going to resonate with you immediately or it's going to take a while for you to get into. There's not a lot of middle ground there. So what makes this book different? I want to spend some real time really talking about the magic system, because it is, by ThinkTwice's own account, the entire reason the series exists. In the Aethon books author spotlight, ThinkTwice talked about where the idea for the root of all evil came from. And the answer is pretty funny. It started with a Reddit comment. Someone asked if there were any series that focused fully on symbol or formation-based magic, like committed to it, built a whole power structure around it. And ThinkTwice responded that there really weren't many that focused on it exclusively. And then he said he wanted to read a series that did. Now here's the problem that ThinkTwice pointed out. Most existing series that start with a main character using runes or symbols eventually pivots. The main character would get stronger and the symbols would get left behind. They'd branch out into weapons or conventional magic that surpasses the formations in power. And then the formations would kind of fall into the background until the author needed them again as a minor plot device, 3 books later or whatever. So ThinkTwice decided to write a series that he wanted to read, and the commitment to that is real. Dollar doesn't use traditional magic. I mean, he barely uses a sword. The entire architecture of his power is built on rune and formation crafting, and that's what makes the system really interesting. And it's not just that it's different, it's that it has a near infinite creative potential within the rules, and Dollar isn't leveling up the same 3 skills on a menu, he's building. Every formation he learns and designs is a new tool. Every combination is something he constructed himself. So if magic system depth is one of the things that you read progression fantasy for, I think this is really going to be your thing. The second element that sets us apart, Bloodline is set in the same world as ThinkTwice's first series, Mark of the Krigic, which I did a first look on and a series overview for, so there's plenty of videos for you to watch about this world and see if you want to get yourself lost in it. So this is the same world, but the main character has a different social class, and it's a completely different angle of entry in terms of what this world has in it and the depth of the world building that you can find in this series. Mark of the Critic shows you the world from a position of relative advantage, access, resources, the infrastructure of power. But Bloodline shows you what the world looks like from the bottom of that structure, with none of those advantages, fighting for basic survival before any of the larger ambitions can become even relevant. So if you've already read Critic, this book gives you a completely new lens on a world that you already know. And a lot of existing Critic fans specifically sought it out for that reason. So if you haven't read Mark of the Critic, that's fine. You don't need to. The author recommends that you do read Mark of the Critic first, but is not expressly required. I will say that if you have read Mark of the Critic first, there's a layer of satisfaction here that non-Mark of the Critic readers won't have access to. Okay, let's talk about Dollar, the main character. Because this is where the whole conversation about this book either clicks or it doesn't. And here's what I want you to understand before you start. Dollar is written to be difficult, not accidentally, not because ThinkTwice lost control of the character, it's deliberate. In that same Aethon interview, ThinkTwice said, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit here, but Dollar spends the entirety of the beginning of the series at the bottom of the emotional food chain. He is actually a bastard, and that is on purpose. He wanted to make a character who could go from being a villain to a human. Villain to human, not villain to hero. Villain to human. That is a very specific and deliberate arc, and as an author I find it genuinely interesting because it's not something you see every day. It's much harder to write that than a hero arc because it's a lot harder to build the empathy. It's a lot harder to make the main character or the reader care about the main character. It's just in general a much more challenging approach to storytelling, and when done well can be an exceptional reader experience. Now here's the caveat. You have to earn every single inch of the character's evolution when you approach it from that way. But the whole thing only works if you can get the reader to stay on the ride long enough to watch it happen. And here's where I have to be direct with you. There are a chunk of readers who cannot. Not because they're wrong, but because the early Dollar is genuinely hard to spend time with. He is money obsessed. He is emotionally closed off in a way that isn't tortured or brooding, it's just kind of flat. He is transactional about relationships, including ones with people who are actively trying to help him. He views people as resources. His first life logic, where the only metric that ever mattered was success, where sentiment was a liability, where warmth was something other people had, bleeds directly into his second life in ways that can be genuinely uncomfortable to read. Some reviewers described his early chapters as a slog, and some people DNF'd within the first 4 chapters for the same reason. Oddly, I saw the word sociopathic come up more than once in reviews. I don't know how fair that is, but that is a descriptor that people use for Dollar, so know that going in. But here's the other side of that, and this is the part that matters for your decision. The readers who pushed through almost universally say the payoff is worth it. The turning point, based on what reviewers consistently describe, is roughly halfway through the book. I think it was past chapter 20, when Dollar leaves his isolated early situation and starts having to interact with the wider world. That's when the story opens up. That's when the companion characters show up. And that's when, by all accounts, the book actually becomes really genuinely fun. So here's why the arc works when it does. Dollar can't be emotionally checked out when someone has a knife to his throat and he has to ask for help. He can't be purely transactional when people are putting themselves at real risk for him and expecting nothing in return. The conflict forces growth because he is confronted repeatedly, physically, inescapably, with situations his first life logic has no answers for. He built an empire on Earth by treating every person as disposable. And that framework breaks down when the stakes are different, when the people around him aren't employees or competitors, but something more complicated. And the thing that makes this resonant when it lands is that ThinkTwice is pretty clear-eyed about what Dollar is. This book doesn't ask you to love him or even excuse him. It asks you to watch him be forced, slowly and sometimes painfully, to reckon with what he is. That's a different kind of character journey, and it's not for every reader, but for the readers who like it, it's exactly what they're looking for. So the question you need to sit with is, can you tolerate a quasi-unlikable protagonist for the first half of a book if you know, not hope, but know, the payoff is there at the end, because that answer will tell you almost everything about whether this book belongs in your TBR. So let me tell you about what people who loved this book really loved about it, because this is where I want to give you the full picture. People love the second half. This comes up consistently, and it came up across every platform I studied. Readers who gave this 4 and 5 stars almost always describe some version of a shift, a specific point where the book stops being set up and becomes story. And once that happens, they couldn't put it down. That kind of consistent pattern is worth paying attention to. It's worth waiting for, according to a lot of the people who like it. And that's not just one enthusiastic reviewer. That was a theme that I saw in the reviews. Now, multiple reviewers specifically flagged unpredictable plotting as a highlight, which I thought was really interesting because it's not a common compliment in the genre, or really in fiction at all. LitRPG and progression fantasy can get very formulaic. You know roughly what beat is coming, you know the power-up is around the corner, you know the mentor figure is going to show up at XYZ point, and readers really called out Bloodline for surprising them. One reviewer said they loved that they couldn't predict the next turn about every 20 minutes, and that's not something you hear in every LitRPG review. Another thing people really liked is the companion characters, specifically Mitzi, Jasper, and, I'm not joking, I can't say this without laughing, Bill the Grek Unipig. I'm not making that up. Bill is a monster-sized pig with opal eyes and a horn on his forehead, and readers have feelings about Bill. Significant feelings. The companion dynamics in the back half of the book are cited repeatedly as a high point. The warmth, the humor, the texture that they bring, even Bill bringing that was a pretty solitary and cold first half. That tonal shift is intentional, and it works. The contrast lands because you've been sitting in Dollar's isolation for long enough that the introduction of other characters who actually have really strong personalities feel like a breath of fresh air. Several reviewers said the companions were the point at which they became fully invested, when the companion characters really joined the story. Yet another thing readers really love is the rune and formation system. As I mentioned earlier, this is genuinely different, and readers who care about magic system depth specifically call this out as a standout. The near infinite creative potential of the crafting system gives this book something to do beyond combat escalation, and for readers who read progression fantasy specifically for the system mechanics, that was actually a pretty significant draw, because it's a fun twist. Many readers also really like how clean the content is. There's no explicit content, there's no gratuitous violence. This is LitRPG that doesn't really rely on adult content to hold your interest, and for readers who want the genre without that layer, that's worth noting. It also makes this a book you can genuinely recommend to a younger reader or someone who's LitRPG curious, but cautious about some of the darker content that LitRPG can get into. Oh, thank God I'm recording. And then there's Henry Kramer. If you're an audiobook person, the Audible community is consistent on this. His narration elevates the experience. He's one of those narrators where the performance adds something, and Audible listeners consistently single him out as such a great performer. So if you are on the fence between print and audio, that's a data point worth having. Now here's what readers kind of struggled with. This is the other side of the coin. And I want to be thorough here because the criticisms in this book are valid and you deserve the full picture. I want to say I always share criticisms with kindness and love for the author and everyone who loves the story. This is just to give you both the pros and the cons as people state them in the reviews. So this is not me hating on anybody. This is just me sharing what I found. So the biggest criticism I saw was the slow start. We've been over this, but this is definitely the number one complaint I saw, and I want to be honest about what that means for you. This book takes time, first to establish Dollar's first life, and then again to set up his early childhood. That's 2 rounds of setup before the story feels like it's moving with real momentum. Several mentioned that they almost put it down before the halfway mark because of this. If you're the kind of reader who needs a book to grab you in the first chapter, this book is going to test your patience. It's not a deal breaker, it's just information. So go in knowing that the first half is an investment you're making against the second half payoff. In terms of the writer style, there were some complaints that there was more telling than showing in the writing style. I did see that come up a couple times, which kind of confused me because Mark of the Critic was written before Bloodline and or before the Root of All Evil series. And so ThinkTwice is a really good writer. So just go in maybe with a pinch of salt, keep that in mind. But that is something that I saw come up more than once, and so I wanted to just pass that along to you. Okay, another thing that readers had problems with was the child body problem. Dollar spends a large portion of this book in the body of a baby and then a 7-year-old, but he thinks, speaks, and makes decisions like a fully formed adult. And other characters largely accept this without much question. So for some readers, this is a total non-issue. I mean, they're familiar with the Isekai genre, and this is a known convention. For others, the cognitive dissonance of watching a 7-year-old conduct himself like a seasoned adult while the people around him just kind of roll with it pulled them out of the story. So know yourself on this one before you start, and just keep that in mind. I also saw mention that there were some issues with the execution in the late book, the latter part of the book. This one actually comes from people who like the book overall, so I think it's worth mentioning. I thought it was really interesting. A handful of reviewers noted that toward the end of the book, things got a little inconsistent. There were a couple of convenient coincidences, and the MC's power set didn't feel as impressive as the early buildup suggested it would be. It's not a deal breaker, and it didn't stop these readers from rating the book really highly, but it's just something to keep in mind in terms of setting our expectations. I like to be specific. I don't like to just give a general up and down. I want to say, who is this for and who is this not for? Bloodline is a good book for a specific reader. It's not for everyone, no book is, and the difference has almost nothing to do with whether you like LitRPG or progression fantasy in general. I think you should read this book if you are a progression fantasy or LitRPG reader who wants a fresh magic system, especially if you like runes and formation crafting, because that is done with a level of commitment that is genuinely rare. If you've been frustrated by systems that start out interesting and then kind of get abandoned as you go, this book was written specifically in response to that frustration. Read this if you like your protagonist arcs to have real and significant transformation, not just power scaling, but emotional evolution. Dollar's arc is a long game, and it asks something of you as a reader. But if that kind of arc is what you're looking for, this definitely delivers. I also think you should read this if you are already a fan of Mark of the Critic. This is a direct companion to that world, and the added context makes it even more satisfying. But if you haven't read Mark of the Critic, don't let that stop you. This book does function on its own. I also think you should read this if you're an audiobook fan who trusts Henry Kramer. If he is already on your list of go-to narrators, this one is going to be a strong listen for you. And also read this if clean content really matters to you. LitRPG without adult content isn't always easy to find, and this one delivers. Now, who should skip this? I would say skip this or put it on hold if you know you bounce off unlikable protagonists and you don't have the patience for a slow build to him becoming an empathetic character. So don't go in expecting to feel great about Dollar from page 1. That is not really what this book is asking of you in the early chapters. So if you need to root for your main character right away, this might be a little bit of a frustrating read. You might not make it to the payoff, but it is there if you want to be patient for it. Also skip it for now if you need a book that hits the ground running. This one front loads its setup and asks you to trust it. One less practical note, the series is 2 books right now and book 2 is already out. So if you read Bloodline and you're in, you're not sitting in release day limbo wondering when the next one comes out. So go get Inheritance and keep reading. If you've read Bloodline already, I want to hear about it in the comments. Specifically, I want to hear from people who DNF'd. Where did you stop and what was the thing that got you? And I want to hear from people who pushed through. What was the second half worth it? That's the conversation I'm really most interested in having right now because I think it'll help other people watching this video make their call. And hey, if this kind of breakdown is useful to you, where I do the research, I dig into the reviews, I give you the honest picture so you can just decide, please consider subscribing. I do this for so many books. I put up a new video every week, and sometimes I can even get up more in 1 week, but only when I meet my writing deadline. Links to the books are in the description below, along with my merch link if you want that hoodie. And as always, happy reading, darling. I will talk to you later. Bye.